Have you ever wondered, could humanity one day cease to exist? Even as technology has advanced so far, life has become easier than ever, and everything is right at our fingertips. Will all this comfort, all these innovations, really last forever? Or let's look at it from another angle. Why does unhappiness seem to grow as we gain more? Why do people feel lonelier, more anxious, more purposeless in the midst of crowds? Maybe now is the time to ask the real question: is our civilization truly progressing, or are we simply heading toward a more complex collapse? The answer to these questions might be found in an experiment that was quietly launched years ago. The year is 1968. While the world lives under the shadow of the Cold War, humanity has its eyes set on the moon. Everyone is focused on the vastness of space, dreaming of reaching the stars. But at that time, in a quiet laboratory, a man unnoticed by many, John B. Calhoun, starts an experiment that would challenge the fate of mankind. This eerie experiment is called Universe 25. Now close your eyes and imagine a massive metal box built for mice, 2.7 meters by 2.7 meters wide, 4.5 meters tall. Inside, everything the mice need to survive has been provided. Plenty of food, clean water, ideal temperature, unlimited nesting material. No disease, no predators. Sounds like mouse heaven, doesn't it? Calhoun places only 4 female and 4 male mice into this artificial utopia, and the experiment begins. But there's one rule in this paradise: there is no way out. No matter how it ends, life will be lived within these boundaries. And the scene that unfolds over time may very well reveal how human civilization itself could collapse. If you're ready, let's now dive deep into the heart of this disturbing experiment. By the way, if you enjoy this kind of content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video. Your support means a lot to me. Welcome to my channel, Discovery of the Mystery, where we will uncover the secrets. John Bumpus Calhoun, born in Tennessee in 1917, built his education and career in the field of biology with a specific focus on ecological behavior science. During the post-World War II era of explosive production and growth, Calhoun became drawn to a problem that very few had yet noticed: the unnaturally rapid rise in population and consumption frenzy. As he studied these periods of reproduction and consumption mania, Calhoun realized that due to Earth's limited resources, this trend would inevitably come to an end. And he began to wonder, what would be left of our civilization when that day came? Bridging the fields of sociology, psychology, and biology, he made the extraordinary decision to launch an experiment to create a utopia for mice. Now, if we stop 10 people on the street, the vast majority would probably describe their dream life as one where everything is abundant. We don't have to work for hours just to survive, and everything is easily accessible, especially younger people, and we shouldn't blame them either. After all, life is meant to be enjoyed, and the beauty of our world should be explored. But will this way of life really allow you to enjoy life? Let me make the question more specific. Will this lifestyle make you happy? Is your answer yes? If your answer is yes, I recommend you reconsider that thought. This video will make you question it. Back to our topic. Rest assured, in the beginning, the poor mice probably thought the same way. But what followed was an absolute disaster. You might be thinking, what does a mouse have to do with a human being? But the social and communal structures of mice, their hierarchical systems, actually resemble the basic order of human societies. That's exactly why, unfortunately, beyond the usual lab experiments, mice are also used in many psychological and behavioral studies so that the data can later be applied to humans as well. Aware of this truth, Calhoun, while conducting research at Johns Hopkins University in 1947, decided to run his own independent experiments outside the university. He asked his neighbor for permission to temporarily use an unused portion of their property and built a massive habitat spanning about 1,000 square meters. He named it Mouse City. Food, water, a safe environment free from predators. What more could a mouse want, right? The only limitation in this paradise, as I mentioned earlier, was that it existed within a confined area. The experiment began with 5 pairs of mice, and genetic diversity was ensured to support ongoing reproduction. Calhoun calculated that the large space could accommodate approximately 5,000 Norwegian mice. But interestingly, the population began to plateau at just 150. Even more surprisingly, the mice didn't use the entire space. Instead, they chose to live in clusters at specific points in a more social manner. Most often, they formed groups of around 12 mice. The experiment continued for about 2.5 years, and the results were absolutely fascinating. Throughout the entire period, the mouse population never exceeded 200, and the main reason was the high mortality rate among newborn mice. Now, 2.5 years might sound short to you, but a mouse reaches sexual maturity just 4 to 6 weeks after birth, with a gestation period of only 19 to 21 days, giving birth to 6 to 12 pups each time. If you consider that a female can give birth nearly 10 times a year, you can imagine how dramatically the population should have increased over 2.5 years. But as I said, that never happened, because for some reason, the mothers stopped taking care of their young after a certain point, and most of them died. Calhoun was never able to fully explain why this happened, and 5 years after the experiment, he began a new position at the National Institute of Mental Health. At this new post out of public view, new experiments would begin, and Calhoun's mouse utopia would take a much darker turn. Starting again in his secluded facility, Calhoun began designing even more refined utopias for mice based on the knowledge he had accumulated over the years. The first of these was a rectangular utopia divided into 4 main sections, connected by 3 bridges. As before, there was unlimited food, sufficient nesting space, and climate control in every section. Not long after the experiment began, things started to take a strange turn. Although the females distributed themselves evenly among the 4 sections, some males assumed dominant roles and began waging battles for control in territories outside their own. They used violence against any males who resisted them. As a result of this behavior, the beaten males were labeled passives in the experiment, and they gradually moved away from the alphas to live quietly with the females out of sight. However, a strange behavioral pattern began to emerge among these males: homosexuality and pansexuality. Some passive males, under pressure from the alphas, stopped approaching females and instead began to approach the alphas sexually. Others withdrew entirely from reproductive activity, removing themselves from the equation altogether. The main reason for this, of course, was to escape the violence and dominance of the alphas. Despite the oppressive regime, it became evident that the mice still didn't give up clustering together. Particularly in feeding areas, the mice were observed gathering side by side despite all the negative circumstances. The growing population also had a strange effect on the females. Over time, they stopped caring for their nests and became more interested in social activities than in raising their young. This led to an increase in infant deaths, and since the females had lost their maternal instincts even while having offspring, the alpha males began aggressively pressuring them to mate again. The once ritualized mating behavior gave way, frankly, to rape, causing increased stress among the females and even higher infant mortality. In this rectangular utopia, Calhoun recorded the emergence of 3 unusual groups. The first group consisted of those with dysfunctional, reproductive, and sexual behaviors, homosexual or pansexual as he described them. The second group could be called the apathetic ones, mice who avoided all social interaction, stayed away from conflict and sex, were inactive, and grew obese. The third unusual group was the probers, a hyperactive group constantly seeking to mate with both males and females, always exploring, never quite sure what they were doing, and persistently returning to these behaviors even after frequent beatings from the alphas. According to Calhoun, after this phase, what he officially termed behavioral sink or behavioral collapse, the colony was effectively finished. Mothers had almost entirely stopped caring for their offspring, and following the collapse of the population, the experiment was ended. Calhoun's paper sparked major debates within American society because the system built for the mice strongly reflected the structure of modern urban life created by humans. Moreover, as resources and technology advance, the emergence of new movements in a generation disconnected from traditional family structures began to resemble, in the eyes of psychologists like Carl Rogers, the behaviors of the mice in Calhoun's experiment. This led some to admit, "I find myself feeling fear for our future." But hold on, because the final experiment hasn't even started yet. And once you see its results, you'll understand that it's not the mice, but us, who may be standing on the edge of collapse. The Universe 25 experiment was actually the final stage and ultimate conclusion of the 24 experiments that came before it. Drawing on years of accumulated knowledge, Calhoun created a complete urban model for his final trial, a square-shaped mouse city 2.7 meters wide and 4.7 meters tall. And for the first time, the nesting spaces for the mice were designed like modern high-rise apartments. 4 healthy breeding pairs were placed into this utopia, where food was unlimited and all needs were met. The population began to double roughly every 55 days. The first phase lasted around 104 days, during which the mice adapted to the environment and built a social structure. Everything seemed fine. The second phase lasted 315 days. It was the exploitation phase. The mice ate, drank, and reproduced rapidly. But by the 315th day, the reproduction rate slowed, shifting from doubling every 55 days to doubling every 145 days. A significant decline had begun, and just like in the earlier Dithiordian room experiment, mice displaying unusual behaviors began to appear within the community. Starting from day 560, the stagnation phase began. Strange individuals became more common, just as in previous experiments. Beaten passive males started grouping together and even began fighting among themselves. Passive females began living together atop the buildings, away from the males. Even among the alphas, rising population brought visible signs of stress. Endless battles broke out between the established alphas and the up-and-coming ones. And the new alpha generation started launching sexual assaults on the previous alpha's females, and even began killing their offspring. Calhoun wrote that by the end of this phase, the social order had completely begun to break down. Indeed, this collapse is followed by the death phase, which begins around day 600. During this period, as chaos further disrupts all balance, the mice, barely able to survive, begin abandoning their offspring at very early ages. As a result, the young can no longer adapt to the society or find a place within the social structure. Even when females of this generation become mothers, they have become so disconnected from their maternal instincts that they are no longer able to care for their young. Consequently, the death rate rises to 96%. Interestingly, the males of this generation display perfectly clean fur and appear exceptionally healthy and attractive. But the reason behind this is quite surprising. These new generation males exhibited narcissistic behavior, lacking any sexual drive, passive, and spending all their time eating and grooming themselves. They did nothing but eat, sleep, and clean themselves. They had no other form of social interaction. In fact, when the last breeding male in the Utopia died on day 1780, the famous Universe 25 experiment officially came to an end with the complete collapse of the mouse Utopia. What's even more remarkable is that even when these so-called beautiful ones, mice with no purpose, were introduced into well-functioning mouse communities, they never again displayed normal mouse behavior. They remained in their withdrawn, purposeless state until they died. Calhoun ended his research with the following disturbing words: "In scenarios where such a societal collapse occurs even among mice, it is clear that a complex being like a human, once having lost their sense of purpose in life, will begin to reject themselves, failing to assign themselves a role within society, and that this alienation and isolation will inevitably trigger violence and social collapse. Individuals in this state will become so fearful of what we call reality that they won't even realize they've become disconnected from society. Truly, it's a haunting experiment, isn't it? And by the way, the mice deserve sympathy too. Even if they're just mice, subjecting living beings to such hellish scenarios in the name of science is, in my view, a disgrace to humanity. But the truly dark part is this: We are now experiencing the exact same outcomes of this grim experiment. And I'm not saying this to dramatize the situation. Based on Calhoun's experiments, we humans may already be entering the fourth phase of the experiment, the death phase. Or maybe we already have, because when we look at global reproduction rates, there's an abnormally sharp decline, especially in developed countries. You can see this reality reflected in various statistics. For example, in the United States, over 40% of marriages end in divorce. Antidepressant usage in the US has reached nearly 70%. So it's not hard to see that society is suffering from a major psychological trauma. When looking at the details of the experiment, we often dismiss it by saying, it's just mice. But look at people today. The alphas, they're the corrupt capitalists, the power-hungry elites, or those running illegal systems who exploit others. The beaten-down, exploited ones, those left starving even in the midst of abundance, are the modern-day workers and office employees. Just like the mice under pressure, many men and women today are reacting in similar ways. Some are becoming extremely promiscuous, engaging in both bisexual and heterosexual relationships with whoever comes their way, while others are completely withdrawing, avoiding human contact and becoming absorbed in pornography or watching people undress on social media. As a result, rates of infidelity and promiscuity have risen to staggering levels. In today's patriarchal, brutally capitalist system, women have begun to masculinize in order to survive. This has led to various emotional fractures, causing many women to struggle with defining what role they should play in society. To avoid being crushed by a male-dominated system, women are sacrificing their emotional structure, hardening themselves, and working like men. And this reality is deeply exhausting for many women. Similarly, men have begun to feminize and become more fragile under intense pressure and manipulation. The most critical point here is this. This transformation is being driven not only by indirect psychological pressure, but also by chemicals in our food that disrupt hormonal balance. After thousands of years of evolution, men are now finding themselves unable to understand or claim their internal role. In short, we think we're experimenting on mice, but in truth, we're using them to understand our own broken system. Sadly, in this experiment, the real test subjects are us. People who have made great contributions to science and humanity are not given nearly as much value as charlatans performing nonsense on social media. We claim to criticize this, but how many of us have actually changed our lives in response? Why do we prefer listening to the life stories of OnlyFans celebrities instead of those who've made real contributions to humanity on YouTube? Why are young people encouraged to listen to podcasts featuring porn stars instead of motivational speakers, and philosophers offering genuinely helpful insight? And why are we constantly exposed to these types of content? Have you ever thought about that? Why has someone put us into a Universe 25 experiment and is now just waiting for us to destroy ourselves? When we reflect on these questions, we're forced to face some painful truths. There are many videos about the Universe 25 experiment on YouTube. I wanted to address this topic in my videos too, because I truly believe this experiment is being reenacted on us today. Please take some time to read about and research this topic. I hope we, as human beings, can become aware of what's happening and appreciate the value of this great gift called life. I hope we can come to understand that life isn't just about shopping, chasing status, stepping on each other, and corrupting everything around us. And maybe, just maybe, one day we can stop being lab rats in this filthy experiment and realize that happiness won't come from the ads we're sold, but from within ourselves. Because if we fail to understand this, it's not hard to see what kind of catastrophe awaits humanity. So what do you think? You can share your thoughts on this topic in the comments. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and stay tuned. By liking and commenting, you can support the channel. See you next time.